Before today's video starts, we just want to take a minute to talk about our amazing sponsor, The Ridge. In just a few weeks is Father's Day, so why not get your dad, or the father of your children, the last wallet they'll ever need? Ridge wallets are incredibly durable and they come with a lifetime warranty. They have wallets that are made from 3 different materials and they have over 30 colors and styles. Ridge wallets are sleek and compact, but they still hold 12 cards plus your cash. The brilliant design of the wallet makes sure you only carry the things that you need. One of my favorite features is that the wallets are secure because they have RFID blocking. It's not a surprise to me that they have over 30,000 5-star reviews. Right now, Ridge is offering criminally listed viewers 10% off with free worldwide shipping and returns. Just go to ridge.com/listed, that's ridge.com/listed, and use the promo code listed at the checkout. Get the last wallet you'll ever need and help support Criminally Listed by checking out ridge.com/listed. Number 3. Victoria Livermore. In the spring of 1979, Victoria Livermore was 17 years old. She lived with her mother and her brother in Roseville, Michigan, which is a city in the Detroit metropolitan area. In the early morning hours of May 19, 1979, Victoria was hanging out with her brother. Around 2 a.m., they were in his van in Fraser, which is another city in Metro Detroit. Victoria and her brother got into an argument. Victoria ended up getting out of the van and storming off. Her brother drove away. But after a few minutes, he had calmed down and he drove back to the area where Victoria had gotten out of the van. Victoria wasn't there. Her brother drove around looking for her, but she was gone. Hours later, Victoria's parents reported her missing. The next day, at around 7:30 p.m., some people were looking for mushrooms in a forested area not far from Gaylord, Michigan. Gaylord is about 225 miles from Fraser, where Victoria was last seen. One of the mushroom hunters came across the dead body of a young woman. She was identified as 17-year-old Victoria Livermore. She was fully clothed, and the medical examiner determined that she had not been sexually assaulted. Victoria had been beaten to death. The killer had hit her at least a dozen times in the head with a blunt object. Found near her body were 3 bloody items: a drape, a furniture throw cloth, and a pillow. 2 days after the body was found, a news station in Detroit showed images of the 3 items. The next day, a couple got in contact with the police and said they recognized the items. The items had come from their cabin that was about 2 miles away from where Victoria's body was found. The police got a search warrant for the couple's cabin. It was an isolated cabin, and their closest neighbors were 200 yards away. The police quickly found evidence that Victoria had been killed in the living room of the cabin. The police also found what they thought was the murder weapon, a hammer. On the hammer, they found a bloody thumbprint. They were able to match the thumbprint to the cabin owner's son, 28-year-old Ramon Scola. Scola was an out-of-work trucker and father of 2. The police interviewed Scola and he confessed. Scola claimed that around 2 a.m. he was drunk and he was driving around Fraser when he came across Victoria hitchhiking. She got into his vehicle and they drove around smoking marijuana. He said at some point they pulled off the road and they had sexual relations. Scola said that he offered Victoria $100 to go to his parents' cabin to have sex with him. She agreed, so they drove to the cabin. Scola said that when they got there, Victoria demanded the money right away. Scola told the police that Victoria said if she didn't get the money right away, she was going to tell people that he had raped a 16-year-old. Scola said that he grabbed Victoria and she elbowed him in the head. The next thing he remembered, he was holding her down on the couch and he was beating her with something heavy. After he was done beating her, he thought she was still alive, so he put tape over her mouth and loaded her into his vehicle. He then dumped the body. Before he left the body, he took the tape off her. The police believe that Scola killed Victoria, but they did not think that the murder went down the way he said it did. At the cabin, they found used pieces of tape. Scola had claimed he had only used tape to cover Victoria's mouth after he had beat her with the hammer. When he dumped the body, he removed the tape and brought it back to the cabin. But the way the tape was cut, it looked like it had been used to bound someone. Also, none of the tape had blood on it. The police concluded that Victoria had been kidnapped and did not go willingly to the cabin. Victoria's parents thought it was disgusting that Scola said that their daughter accepted money for sexual favors. Scola went to trial in January 1980, just over 6 months after the murder. The trial lasted for 3 days, and the jury deliberated for 2.5 hours. Scola was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 50 to 80 years of prison. A search of Michigan's inmate database shows that Scola is no longer incarcerated. His current whereabouts are unknown. Number 2. Laura Almon and Leslie Elmer. Laura Almon and Leslie Elmer were lifelong friends who grew up in Denver, Colorado. In the autumn of 1976, they were both 18 years old, and they were attending the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, Colorado. Almon and Elmer were roommates in one of the university's dormitories. On Friday, November 12, 1976, the two friends decided to take a break from campus life after finishing their midterm exams. They drove to Almon's family cabin, which was near Rollinsville, Colorado. The cabin had been used as a getaway by the Almon family for 2 decades. On Sunday night, the families of the two young women were expecting to hear from them, but they didn't. So their families reported them missing. It turned out that, on Saturday, the body of Leslie Elmer was found in the South Boulder Creek, about a mile from the cabin. She had been shot once in the head with a .22 caliber rifle. Elmer was nude, but she had not been sexually assaulted. The police went to the cabin, and it was clear she had been shot there. Laura Almon was not in or around the cabin. The police conducted searches for her around the cabin and the place where Elmer's body was found. But Almon wasn't found dead or alive. A witness came forward and he said he saw the two young women arrive at the cabin. He said that a tall teenage boy appeared to be helping them with their luggage. Tests were done on the blood found in the cabin. On the 6th day of the search for Laura Almon, the results came back. There were 2 different blood types in the cabin, suggesting Laura Almon was dead as well. At first, the police were baffled by the crime scene. The young women didn't have any enemies. Also, nothing had been stolen from the cabin. It appeared that someone entered the cabin and shot them for no reason. Then, on November 30th, nearly 2.5 weeks after Leslie Elmer's body was found, the police announced that they had a suspect in custody. His name was Craig Allen Davenport. He was just 15 years old. Davenport's family had a cabin that wasn't far from the Almon cabin. On the weekend that Elmer was killed and Almon disappeared, Davenport was staying in his family's cabin with two of his uncles, his mother, and his stepfather. The young women had stopped by their cabin to borrow some water. They had also invited Davenport and his family to visit them. Davenport came to the attention of the police because his uncle gave them a .22 caliber rifle that Davenport was known to use. The rifle held 8 rounds. After getting the rifle, the police sent it to be tested. Davenport's uncle said he first became suspicious of his nephew after he heard that Davenport went out on the night Elmer was killed and Almon went missing. When he came back to the cabin, he had blood on his coat. His uncle then saw the coat in the dryer, and it was apparent that it had just been washed. Davenport's uncle asked him about the blood, and he said he had shot a deer. The uncle looked around the cabin for any evidence of an animal being shot, and he found nothing. Another uncle caught Davenport's mother and stepfather trying to hide the rifle. He said they were trying to hide it because they thought that Davenport had killed the 2 young women. The police searched the truck that Davenport drove. In the cab of the truck, they found blood. Davenport claimed that the blood was from the deer he had killed. He claimed he had tried to load the body of the deer into the cab of his truck. The police thought that this was incredibly odd because why wouldn't he have put the deer's body into the bed of the truck? The blood was tested and it was human blood. It was a rare blood type that only 3 in 1,000 people had. Leslie Elmer happened to be one of those people who had the rare blood type. Also found in the truck was some carpet fibers. They were consistent with fibers found in the Almon's cabin. A bloody boot print was found in the Almond cabin. The police thought that Davenport's boot made the print. While the police investigated Craig Davenport, the search for Laura Almond's body continued. On December 11, 1976, 29 days after they started searching for Almon, scuba divers found her body. It was in the same creek where Leslie Elmer's body was found. Almon's body was found in some deeper water that was about 100 feet from where Elmer's body was found. Almon was partially clad, and there were no signs she had been sexually assaulted. Almon had been shot 7 times in the chest and the head. Ballistic tests were done, and the rifle that Davenport's uncle handed over to the police was the murder weapon. The rifle held 8 bullets, and the young women had been shot 8 times. Craig Davenport didn't confess to the murders, but the police were able to piece together what they thought had happened. They thought that Davenport came into the cabin and shot Leslie Elmer in the left temple. Laura Almon was in a sleeping bag, and Craig unloaded the rifle on her. As he was shooting, he walked closer to her. 2 bullets were fired half a foot away from her body, and 4 more were fired from 4 inches away. After Davenport killed them, he took off most of their clothes, then he loaded their bodies into his truck and drove them out to the creek where he dumped the bodies. 16-year-old Craig Davenport went to trial in May 1977 for 2 counts of first-degree murder. Even though Davenport was 15 when the murders happened, he was tried as an adult. Earlier that year, Leslie Elmer's father asked for lawmakers to change the age of people eligible for the death penalty from 16 to 14. They declined to change the law, so the maximum sentence Davenport could get was a life sentence. The blood test, the carbon fibers, and the ballistic tests were all entered into evidence. The only thing that wasn't entered into evidence was the bloody boot print. An expert said that there were too many differences between the bloody boot print and the soles of Davenport's boots to say for sure that he left the print. Davenport's lawyer argued that none of the evidence proved that Davenport committed the double murder. He agreed that Davenport used the gun that was the murder weapon, and blood was found in the truck that he drove, but none of that proved he was the killer. No evidence, like his fingerprints, placed him inside the Almon's cabin. The trial lasted for about 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 19 and a half hours. They found 16-year-old Craig Allen Davenport not guilty of first-degree murder. Instead, he was found guilty on 2 counts of second-degree murder. He was looking at a sentence of 10 to 50 years of prison. The judge ended up sentencing him to 30 to 35 years of prison. He was sent to serve his sentence at the Colorado State Prison in Canyon City, where he was the youngest inmate. Davenport behaved in prison, and he had time shaved off his sentence. He was released from prison after serving just 15 years. He then moved to Ulysses, Kansas, and he changed his name to Craig Allen Fisher. In Ulysses, he married a woman named Minnie. Minnie had a daughter from a previous relationship, and then she went on to have 2 children with Fisher. Fisher's father-in-law gave him a job hauling manure. In August 1996, Fisher, who was 35, was at home with his 11-year-old stepdaughter. His stepdaughter had a 9-year-old friend over. At some point, Fisher asked the 2 girls if they had ever played the blackout game. Fisher took the 9-year-old into the bathroom and held her in a headlock until she passed out. He then brought his 11-year-old stepdaughter into the bathroom and did the same thing to her. Minnie came home and found both girls unconscious, so she called 911. Both girls were taken to the hospital and they survived. One of the responding officers was deeply disturbed by the situation. He said that one of the girls' faces had turned black. He had never seen a living person's face turn black before. He had only seen that on dead bodies. In November 1996, Fisher was convicted of aggravated battery, and he was sentenced to 31 months in prison. On September 15, 2000, 16-year-old Charity Monty was playing golf alone on a golf course in Syracuse, Kansas. Charity was an accomplished high school athlete. As she got to the 6th hole, a man approached her and asked her if she had seen his brown dog. Suddenly, the man was on top of her, ripping her clothes off. He told her not to fight him or he would shoot her. Charity managed to get away from the man and she started running. The man started firing a handgun at Charity. Charity was shot twice in the right elbow, once in the upper right arm, and once in the right side of the face. Despite her wounds, Charity managed to run for a quarter of a mile, and then her father found her. Charity was rushed to the hospital. Several people saw a white pickup truck near the golf course around the time of the shooting, and a few people got the license plate. Hours after the attack, Craig Allen Fisher was arrested. Charity identified him as her attacker. Fisher was charged with attempted murder and attempted rape. Charity made a full physical recovery after 2 weeks. 3 weeks after the attack, she won her first ever golf tournament. Fisher went to trial about 6 months later in March 2001. He was found guilty of attempted murder. Fisher, who was 40, was sentenced to 70 years in prison. At the time of this video, Craig Allen Fisher, aka Craig Allen Davenport, is 59 years old, and he is serving his sentence at the Lansing Correctional Facility in Lansing, Kansas. His earliest possible release date is September 20th, 2060, so he'll most likely die in prison. Number 1. The Torreon Cabin Murders. Torreon is a small community just outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Benaniah Sr. built his cabin there in a wooded area called Sherwood Forest. It was a 2-bedroom cabin with a bathroom, kitchen, and living room. The cabin didn't have any running water. The water for the cabin was stored in a 55-gallon drum that sat outside the cabin. Ben Sr., who was a former Marine, was very conscientious when it came to security. All the doors and windows had big iron locks on them. Also, there was a perimeter fence with a gate surrounding the cabin. On April 14, 1996, Ben Sr. went to his cabin. When he got there, he found the gate open. He went up to the front door and unlocked it. In the cabin, the smell of death lingered heavily in the air. He found 2 decomposing bodies and he called the police. One of the bodies was 17-year-old Benaniah Jr. Another body was Ben Jr.'s girlfriend, 23-year-old Cassandra Cedillo. They had both been shot to death in bed. It appeared that Ben Jr. had been shot first. He was shot once behind the right ear. Cassandra had been shot twice. One bullet went through her right arm and into her chest, and then she was shot once more behind the right ear. Sadly, these were not the only dead bodies in the cabin. 2 other dead bodies were found. They were the bodies of Cassandra's 2 sons, 4-year-old Johnny Ray Garcia and 3-year-old Matthew Jean Garcia. It appeared that the killer, or killers, either didn't know or didn't care that the 2 boys were in the cabin when they killed their mother and her boyfriend. When the killer, or killers, left the cabin, they locked the children inside and sealed their fate. The 2 boys had died from dehydration and starvation. It's believed that the 2 boys survived 3 days to a week before dying. The murder shocked the people of New Mexico, and a massive investigation was started. Based on when the victims were last seen and the state of the bodies, the police thought that they had been killed on or around December 12th, which was about 5 months earlier. The police learned that Ben Jr. was a member of a gang called the 18th Street Gang. The police began to speculate that the murders were somehow connected to the gang. They interviewed a gang member named Lawrence Nieto. Nieto kept changing his story, but his official story is as follows. Ben Jr. was wanted by the police because there was a warrant for his arrest for burglary and parole violation. So Ben Jr., his girlfriend, and her 2 children went to the cabin to hide out. Another gang member, 19-year-old Sean Popliski, supposedly went with them. At the time, Popliski was on the outs with the gang. The gang had a 3 strikes and you're out rule. Popliski had 3 strikes against him. On 2 different occasions, he used another gang member's alias, and this led to the other gang member getting arrested. Those were 2 strikes. The 3rd strike stemmed from an incident where Popliski was caught sleeping in a stolen car. Popliski told the police that another gang member had stolen the car, so that gang member was arrested, and Popliski didn't face any charges himself. So the gang wanted to beat up Popliski as a way to demonstrate that he was no longer a member of the gang. Popliski knew the gang wanted to beat him up, so he decided to go to the cabin. Nieto said that the gang found out that he went to the cabin. Nieto claimed that two other gang members, Sean Wilkins and Roy Buckner, both 19, came to his house and convinced him to go to the cabin. On the way to the cabin, Wilkins said that the plan was to kill Popliski. Nieto said when they got to the cabin, Ben Jr. welcomed them inside. That evening, they played with the children, drank, and did some drugs. Nieto said at some point that night, Wilkins and Buckner told him that there was a change in the plans. They were going to wear ski masks and gloves and rob the cabin. Ben Jr.'s father had over a dozen guns in the cabin. Nieto, Wilkins, and Buckner all went out to the car and got on ski masks and gloves. Nieto armed himself with a shotgun. As they approached the cabin, they came across Popliski, who had come outside. Nieto said he pointed his shotgun at Popliski and made him lie down on the ground. Then Wilkins and Buckner entered the cabin. Nieto claimed he heard 7 or 8 gunshots and he assumed that everyone in the cabin had been shot. Nieto said he fired his gun into the air and Popliski took off running. Popliski got into Ben Jr.'s Jeep Cherokee and he drove off. Then Wilkins and Buckner came out of the cabin. They were walking towards the car, but then Buckner turned around, ran back to the cabin door, and locked it. Then Nieto said he got in the car with Wilkins and Buckner, and they drove back to Albuquerque. Along the way, they got rid of the gloves, mask, and guns. Nieto said that Wilkins and Buckner laughed about not leaving any witnesses behind. So he assumed that everyone in the cabin had been shot to death. This was the story that Lawrence Nieto settled on. He had made other statements to the police that incriminated himself more, but he maintained that he had never intended to rob or kill anyone. The police got a similar story from Sean Popliski, but some critical details were different. Popliski said that earlier on the day of the murders, Wilkins and Nieto visited them at the cabin. They hung out for a few hours and then they left. Popliski said that later that night, he, Ben Jr., Cassandra, and her 2 sons were hanging out in the cabin. At some point in the night, he had to urinate. Since the cabin didn't have running water, he went outside. He said that all of a sudden, Sean Wilkins walked up behind him and pressed the barrel of a rifle against his back. Popliski said that Wilkins was wearing a ski mask, but he knew it was him. Popliski said that he was forced to lie down on the ground. Then someone put their foot on his back and he was told not to move. Popliski said that Wilkins went inside and someone whose face he didn't see held a gun to his back. Popliski said that he heard 5 gunshots. He told the person who was watching him to go see what was going on. When he did, Popliski ran to Ben Jr.'s Jeep Cherokee, he got in, and he drove off. He left the state the next day in the Jeep Cherokee, and he eventually abandoned it in Texas. Popliski said that he thought that only 2 men came to the cabin that night. He said that the other man could have been Roy Buckner. Popliski thought that Wilkins killed Ben Jr. because he wanted to move up ranks in the gang. At first, Sean Popliski was going to be the star witness for the prosecution. But then the district attorney decided to charge him in connection with the murders as well. They thought he had a lot more to do with the murders than he admitted to. They also thought that Popliski wanted Ben Jr. dead because he blamed him for getting kicked out of the gang. All 4 men went to trial separately. The first was Lawrence Nieto, who went to trial in July 1997. There was no physical evidence that connected him to the murders. The only evidence against him were the statements that he and Sean Popliski had made to the police. Nieto was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 130 years in prison. Next up was Sean Wilkins, who both Nieto and Popliski said was the trigger man. Wilkins' lawyer argued that his client was never at the cabin, and there was no physical evidence that places him there. Instead, he claimed that Sean Popliski committed the murders himself. He pointed out that Popliski admitted that he was at the cabin on the night of the murders and he stole Ben Jr.'s Jeep Cherokee. The trial lasted for a little more than a week. It ended in a hung jury. 9 had voted to convict, 2 had voted to acquit, and the last juror was undecided. Roy Buckner went to trial over a month later, in November 1997. The prosecution contended that he went to the cabin with Wilkins and Nieto. He was also the one who supposedly locked the door to the cabin, which led directly to the deaths of the 2 boys. Buckner testified that Ben Jr. was one of his closest friends, and they had been friends since the age of 12. He was adamant that he had nothing to do with the murders. The jury was deadlocked once again. This time 8 had voted to acquit, and 4 had voted to convict. Sean Popliski went to trial in August 1999. The prosecution contended that Popliski had unlocked the door and let Wilkins and Buckner into the cabin. Popliski's lawyer argued he had nothing to do with the murders. He pointed out that Popliski was on the outs with the gang at the time of the murders. In fact, he was supposed to be a victim, but he had escaped and fled in the Jeep Cherokee. The prosecution argued that even if that was true, that Popliski would still be guilty in the deaths of the boys. Had he called the police after the shooting, then the boys could have been saved from their horrible fate. Popliski's lawyer argued that Popliski had no way of knowing who was alive inside the cabin after he fled. The jury ended up acquitting Popliski on the murders of Benaniah Jr. and Cassandra Cedillo. But he was found guilty of second-degree murder in the deaths of Johnny Ray Garcia and Matthew Jean Garcia. He was sentenced to 16.5 years in prison. In January 2001, the charges against the alleged triggerman, Sean Wilkins, were dismissed. 2 months later, the charges against Roy Buckner were also dismissed. They have always maintained their innocence. In 2008, Sean Popliski was released from prison. Afterward, he moved to Nevada. In 2012, he was convicted of attempted assault with a deadly weapon. He served some time in jail and he was released. He started living in Alaska in 2015 and he has been arrested several times for crimes related to vagrancy. In 2007, Lawrence Nieto's convictions were overturned. Instead of going to trial again, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 39 years of prison, which included time served. This made him eligible for parole in 2022. But due to a clerical error, he was released 10 years earlier. He was released in March 2012, but he violated his parole and he was sent back to prison. Amazingly, he was paroled again months later in August 2012. Once again, he violated the terms of his parole and he had to go back to prison. He was released for a 3rd time in September 2012. However, this time, someone realized a mistake had been made and he was sent back to prison. Lawrence Nieto will be able to apply for parole in 2022. Thank you so much for watching today's video. We hope you found it interesting. If you're looking for some new videos to watch, why not check out my new channel, Chapter Dark, and see if you can solve the mysteries in the videos. If you like riddles, puzzles, or escape rooms, Chapter Dark will be right up your alley. A link to Chapter Dark should appear on the screen momentarily, and you can also find a link in the description box below this video. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, we'd really appreciate it if you gave us a thumbs up. Please also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Roku. The links are in the description box. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching, and please stay safe.